My name is Anna Goldenberg. I work at the New York City Department of Education with elementary school students, grades K through 5, in a general education school. I presented this talk in December 2020 at the Janet Paul Kessler Distinguished Lectureship at Columbia University. Today, I wanted to share an idea with you. It's still in its early phases, but it's something that developed slowly over the course of the years and through a deep understanding of a very specific need in our city. It's called Looking Ahead: How OTs Can Contribute to the Design of Our School System's Behavior Management Reform. We have children in the school system that present with extreme disruptive behavior. Imagine walking towards a classroom to work with your student, only to find them and the rest of their class standing outside the doors, waiting for the student inside to calm down. You hear loud noises, and when everybody is finally allowed to re-enter the classroom, you see desks flipped upside down, papers destroyed, bulletin boards torn apart. The effort that teachers have put into making a comfortable classroom environment has been reversed in a matter of minutes. Have you ever encountered children with these behaviors in your workplace? Psychologist Dr. David Gottlieb described these intense behavior episodes as anger overload, where a child reaches an anger threshold from which they cannot be redirected. Anger overload is characterized as an intense behavior response to a perceived emotional trigger. The trigger can be a rejection, a response to limit setting, or a child's unique sensitivity. Although anger overload is separate from diagnoses such as ADHD, bipolar disorder, and oppositional defiant disorder, they can be co-occurring. Throughout the years, our school continues to do a great job in handling the episodes of anger overload. Safety, above all, has become the key factor for protecting the child, peers, and staff alike. Even though our students are safe, the flow of the school day is disrupted. These incidents can also instill fear or insecurity in classmates. Ultimately, everybody is affected. So I thought that historically, remembering the times that I was in school, there were certain consequences for this type of behavior, but I didn't see any. I haven't even heard, "Ooh, you're gonna get in trouble," a famous tune that often filled the halls of schools. In the 90s, schools practiced something called the zero tolerance policy. As soon as a child exhibited aggressive or destructive behavior towards their environment or towards other people, they were immediately dealt with suspensions, detention, or law enforcement. But slowly we saw that these approaches were not effective. They only reinforced mistrust between the child and the school. They were not solutions to fix or prevent the underlying cause of the problem. And oftentimes, students were sent back home to the very place their behaviors and their maladaptive responses originated. This gave rise to social emotional learning and the restorative justice reform, which was strongly promoted by Mayor Bill de Blasio, influencing all New York City public schools and schools across the nation. This approach emphasizes the importance of building relationships through collaborative and non-punitive ways to strengthen understanding and support between the students and the school staff. The Department of Education now provides all elementary schools with the Sanford Harmony curriculum. To encourage relationship building and empathy, Sanford Harmony addresses social emotional learning through role play, small group collaboration, and guided discussion. Our school also implemented the ruler approach, an approach developed by the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. The ruler approach infuses the school culture with an emotions matters mindset and uses visuals such as the mood meter to increase emotional awareness and vocabulary. Although this shift in policy has been thoroughly debated in the media for its effectiveness, they're wonderful programs and a great foundation because they recognize that punishment is not the solution and instead focus on establishing strong positive relationships grounded in emotional learning and the building of trust. We're forced to recognize that these programs are headed in the right direction, but they alone are not enough to eliminate unwanted behaviors and reduce major disruptions in the flow of the school day. Since occupational therapists at the DOE are part of a team, I wanted to look at the problem from a behavior standpoint and get a better understanding of how our colleagues, the guidance counselors, psychologists, and other behavior specialists view behavior. What systems and strategies do schools already have in place? There are many ways of studying behavior. Our school's guidance counselors conduct a thorough ABC analysis to understand the antecedent, behavior, and consequence of undesired behaviors. In general, behaviors in children are viewed as serving one of four functions: to escape, to get attention, to meet sensory needs, or for a tangible reward or activity. Once the specific triggers and antecedents are well understood, a behavior intervention plan is created, and the team uses data collection logs to measure the incidence and test effectiveness of the prescribed strategies. Strategies often used in BIPs include incentive rewards for preferred behaviors and de-escalation techniques such as taking a walk with a paraprofessional for a calming activity. Acting out episodes from a behavior perspective can be viewed as a series of 7 phases, illustrated as a bell curve. There's typically a calm phase followed by triggers leading to agitation, acceleration, and peak before the child can de-escalate and recover. Somewhere along the acceleration level, there lies an anger threshold, a point from which a child can no longer turn back. The key is to avoid this point at all costs. Have you ever tried to teach a child who is not in their calm phase? How successful are you? An interesting thing to know is that the calm phase is the only time where learning could happen. The calm phase is a time to practice the tools and strategies needed to prevent future anger episodes. This is a time where we can talk to the child about their triggers from a cognitive point of view. The trigger phase is a time to observe, analyze, and understand the child's motive, the function of why he's exhibiting this behavior, and to put the previously learned calming techniques into practice. I want to introduce a socioeconomic perspective because it's only through a thorough analysis and a deep understanding of the guiding factors of a situation can we begin to truly contribute to a solution. There's a socioeconomic and perceived trauma factor that schools must consider when thinking about children with difficult behavior. Suzanne Sanchez, the director of OT, PT, and speech at the DOE, brought to our attention the idea of therapy through the lens of trauma, or taking a trauma-informed approach. Further researching this perspective and exploring the approach with my students opened the door for opportunities to hear their inner worlds. Stories poured out from their hearts that I never expected. Stories that sometimes put tears in my eyes because I may have not been seeing the person who I was looking at all along. I later researched that more than 114,000 children are homeless in the New York City public schools. That's 1 out of every 10 students living without a permanent home. Over the past decade, homelessness in the New York City system has increased by 70%. More and more students experience parents working double shift jobs, students often being watched by siblings and grandparents who can't help them with schoolwork. They may not always have opportunities for quiet time or personal space to unwind and get work done. Not every child is lucky enough to be taken to the playground to play or an after-school sport to exercise. The time spent on electronic devices versus social leisure activities with positive companions results in decreased opportunity to practice social emotional skills. When we take a purely academic approach, we get frustrated if the student didn't bring their homework for the 5th day in a row, or constantly leaves their pencil at home. When we look at them through the lens of trauma, we offer them to use our pencil and hold on to it. We offer them to leave it on their desk so that they can always have it. When they don't bring in their homework, we ask them, how can I help? And what do you need? And what can I do? Tell me anything. I realized that there were losses, pains, and resentments even at such a young age. To add to this, students with IEPs or students waiting for IEPs struggled with social skills, emotional regulation, sensory processing disorder, ADHD, or other developmental conditions. In addition to the fast-paced curriculum, with little room for imperfection, students had to learn to thrive and overcome obstacles that deprived them of their basic needs against all odds. All of a sudden, emotional problems leading to unpreferred behaviors didn't appear so surprising. In fact, there was a concrete explanation demanding a concrete solution. In reviewing different articles on New York City DOE's budget allocations for supporting schools with high-need children populations, it became very apparent that we have no easy solution to a very big need. New York City schools and school districts across the country are looking for evidence-based strategies to improve their learning and social environments in the most cost-effective method of delivery possible. How can OTs contribute? Why OT? Because we think differently. Occupational therapists perform an analysis of individual skills, task demands, and environmental factors in everything that we do. We consider a child's sensory processing needs. We believe in motor learning approaches. Occupational therapists incorporate social emotional learning throughout all of our interactions and apply cognitive frameworks to grade or modify the tasks. We're also mental health professionals, and not to leave this one out, we know how to analyze play skills and their implications. Now that we have established how amazing OTs truly are, it seamlessly brings me to the next part of this talk, the undeniable fact that we have a lot to contribute to the progress towards a greater school culture. An OT perspective contributes a new way of addressing behavior challenges in schools, as well as enhances and supports all the current models being used today. Imagine if you were an OT who had as supportive and forward-thinking of an administration and staff as I was blessed to have in my school. What would you do? If you were an OT, would you infuse your school with OT values, sprinkling magic fairy dust and watching as beautiful things begin to happen? My first order of business when I got my job in this school was to get a trampoline, then a balance ball, because vestibular activities actually help with reading and dynamic visual acuity. And then a balloon tennis setup for kinesthesia and eye-hand coordination. And then I began to see the children stop by who weren't on my caseload, but who needed a movement break to manage their behavior and sensory needs. We then set up sensory stations throughout every hallway, calming corners in classrooms, a yoga wall. We built a sensory room. We then also added a movement path on one hallway floor near my office. Although as an OT, it's easy to fall into routines, it's truly rewarding to step outside of them and inspire the world with the things that we believe in. Each of these projects ended up being a true team collaboration of students and staff alike, all eager to see positive change, all invested or curious or observant. Everyone's hopes were sparked. I began to see a ripple effect towards a culture of problem solvers. And since everyone was only supportive, I got the opportunity to see that students with difficulty with emotional regulation and behavior challenges began to gravitate towards these activities. We began to see improvement in the school as a whole. There were so many options to choose from when carrying out BIPs that naturally the sensory profiles of individual students were taken into consideration when choosing movement breaks. When teaching calming strategies, students had a number of strategies available to them already set up and were able to explore what worked specifically for them. The collaboration amongst professionals further increased because there was so much to talk about and observe. I can't even remember when walking down the hall with a paraprofessional was the only option offered to students to help them calm down. The most amazing thing is that the systems that were set up in the public spaces of our school were pretty hands-off. I didn't have many of the children with behavior challenges on my caseload. Once these systems were set up, they were often implemented by other members of the team involved in that student's care. From these experiences, I've come to believe that occupational therapists can contribute a unique multisensory approach to fostering wellness and reducing acute misbehavior incidents in students on a school-wide level. There have been many studies showing effectiveness of OT interventions on behavior outcomes in children diagnosed with ASD. The DOE has even released a guidance document for it. There's also a body of evidence supporting sensory processing intervention to reduce the need for seclusion rooms and use of restraint in psychiatric settings. The Child's Mind Institute and other guiding bodies are now encouraging a strong consideration for sensory processing as an underlying factor in disruptive behavior. There have not been too many studies showing OT interventions' effectiveness on reducing violent and aggressive behavior in students in a public school environment. Furthermore, there has never been a program specifically designed for it. What I would like to see in the future is a program that offers a dynamic, multisensory approach to emotional learning and behavior management that effectively reduces the incidence of anger overload in schools. When thinking about anger overload in my school, I followed a path of 3 guiding questions and introduced 3 tools grounded in OT theory with consideration for the guiding policies schools currently operate on. Question number 1, how could we increase the anger overload threshold? We saw the bell curve, and the key is to stay away from the anger threshold. How could we make it harder for a child to reach the state of anger overload, even if he's triggered later on in the day? I like the term preventative de-escalation, and we seem to have found a perfect tool. I don't need to go into the details of the benefits of high-intensity interval training, being in the present, distraction and laughter, and the power of fully engaging in a non-threatening activity with this audience. Almost always, the child walked away from their movement breaks in a whole different physical, cognitive, and emotional state than when they started. We asked one student who came from a difficult home environment to start his day with movement path before class, especially if his parents sensed that he would be having a challenging morning, and saw positive results with overall decreased anger overload episodes with this approach. The total cost of the movement path funded by a Donors Choose grant was $239. Question number 2. How can we teach self-awareness, a foundation to social emotional learning? I noticed that in the growing field of social emotional learning, there's so many times we ask children to tell us about their emotions or find a label for what they're feeling on a chart of feeling words, or to tell us what makes them calm. Do they prefer yoga or breathing or this fidget? We sometimes just hand them a strategy and decide on their behalf that it's exactly the thing that they need. I find it funny because that makes social emotional learning kind of theoretical. Many children have no idea what helps them or even how they feel. At such an early age, they probably never smelled lavender or tried meditation unless someone has already practiced it with them. What if they're an introvert living in a noisy social world? What if their home circumstances put them into fight or flight and their emotional cup is already almost empty by the time they get to school? Or what if they're not at the level where they can verbally communicate, but they can show us through leading the exploration process in their environment? If we think about it, just like learning colors on a color wheel, self-awareness and the skills that stem from it have strong roots in practical exploration, discussion, and experiencing contrast. Children who exhibit anger overload episodes or maladaptive behaviors in general feel certain feelings and respond automatically in the only way they can immediately access, bypassing metacognition. Our job is to help them reroute the process and bring mindfulness into the equation. The key is to introduce a cognitive process to emotions. Guided exploration of sensory environments, thoughts, and feelings is the key to teaching self-awareness. We found that a sensory room invites this process in an interactive and tangible way. But the tools and variation and strategy offered by this room are unlimited. The flow of a 30-minute session in the sensory room is first exploring and setting up a perfect environment, then selecting an activity, followed by a reflections piece. In the reflections component, a child chooses either a Likert happiness rating scale, drawing a picture of their favorite part of the session, writing or dictating how they felt before and after using the room, or a questionnaire. We not only get to observe changes from start to end of that session, but monitor the changes in reports long term. Something to keep in mind is that using the sensory room is never a response or consequence of an anger overload episode, but rather a consistent scheduled time for working on self-awareness for students who are not yet able to identify, communicate, manage, or prevent maladaptive behavior responses independently. It's like having a scheduled class with a predetermined time and frequency selected by the RTI or IEP team. The total cost of this Donors Choose grant was $973. Number 3, how can we promote autonomy in managing emotional regulation in a least restrictive manner? Once a student can demonstrate the ability to identify their triggers, communicate their feelings, and independently ask for breaks, how could we as a school create a system to support the child's independence to manage their own emotions in the least restrictive environment? This is where Calming Corners come to the rescue, and our school-wide ruler program fits right in. The Calming Corners are the same throughout every classroom to promote a sense of continuity and honor the strategies a child has already learned. The Calming Corners provide choices of deep breathing exercise, guided meditation, fine motor and sensory tools, and the ruler strategies. The child uses the mood meter to identify their feelings before they start and reassess after a 5-minute mark. They can return to their seat when their emotions are in the yellow or green zone. Imagine involving a team of occupational therapists in the creation of a toolkit that could be streamlined and packaged into a box and shipped to all New York City public schools. Each kit would include materials to easily set up sensory-based strategies across the accessible spaces of a school. This toolkit would be inexpensive to produce and would provide unlimited support to students facing emotional and behavioral challenges throughout their school day. Even though we see good anecdotal outcomes with children who have tried these interventions as part of their school day, it would be beneficial to do more concrete data collection and scientifically show effectiveness. If I would design a study, I'd like to test for qualitative and quantitative improvement of OT intervention on the incidence of anger overload. I would define anger overload by specific frequency, extent, and duration. Quantitatively, I would check if interventions reduced the incidence of disruptive behaviors based on the data collected in BIPs and ABC analysis. Qualitatively, I would check for positive outcomes on the Likert happiness rating scales and self-reports in the reflections activity for each session, as well as over a period of time. I'd also like to see if the reports included more complexity in emotional vocabulary, indicating positive emotional learning. I would like to thank all the people who have crossed my path to make the ideas and execution of this project possible. It's actually a giant team, and thank you to all my professors at Columbia University, my colleagues at the DOE, and my learning partners.